I feel like every Sunday I get up and say, I've been on another trip for another funeral. This week we went to Arizona. My wife was there all week getting things ready for her father's funeral, and I went out with her sister, and our daughter met us just for a couple of days in Arizona. It was a wonderful chance to gather with family and to pay our respects to this beloved person in our life. We were staying at his house. Now, he was a Michigander. He went to U of M. He practiced medicine in Detroit for many years, but when he got married to his second wife after living here for a while, they decided to retire to Arizona, and they built their dream house in the mountains north of Phoenix, up in the Payson Pine area. And this house is just lovely. He built it in this area where he loved to sit out on his deck, and you could see the valley and the mountains, and there's a yard. He bought the lot behind so animals would come, and so we spent a couple mornings just sitting and thinking about him on his favorite spot on this deck and enjoying the beauty of nature. And I really resonated with the Song of Solomon today, because as we were sitting there, he used to feed all the hummingbirds, and I think all of the hummingbirds in Arizona came to visit us while we were sitting on that deck. Clouds of hummingbirds clustered around this feeder, and then we looked down and some mule deer came every morning to graze in their little garden. And then, I think it was 2 mornings ago, I looked out and an elk. Oh, cool, I've never seen an elk. Another elk, another elk, another elk. About 30 plus elk walked right through the yard. Now apparently that's what they did. This was kind of their place. And I was saying at 8 o'clock that the male elk with the big antlers, he made this really funny sound. Gene Bale told me it's a bellow. It's called a bellow. That's how he keeps his flock. I was thinking of the Good Shepherd. This is the Good Shepherd giving the bellow to the other elk to stay in line. But there was something very comforting about that. The other thing that happened on our drive up from Phoenix on Thursday, it was a very unsettled weather day. There were dark clouds. There was a little bit of rain. You could see rain in the forecast in the distance. And then the most stunning rainbow I've ever seen in my life. And we followed this rainbow all the way up the highway from Phoenix up to Pine. We could see it from different angles. It was lit, sort of backlit against the dark clouds. It was absolutely amazing. The Song of Solomon is a controversial book in the Bible because it glorifies human love, even sexual love, and it also portrays nature in a very positive light. And the Puritans really didn't like any of that. They would have been happy to take that book of the Bible out. But for me, it's a powerful book because it's an allegory of the love of God for all of God's creation. That our human love and our love for nature are a reflection of the way we are created to be in love with God. And I thought about that so powerfully this week as I saw the absolute grandeur of nature and how that comforts us in times of grief or trouble or difficulty. Over the years, I've done surveys of parishioners. Where do you feel closest to God? I always hope it's going to be, of course, during the sermon, right? Or during the music. Yes, those are good. But what almost everybody says is, I feel closest to God where? In nature, right? It's something about nature that speaks to our souls, that takes us out of ourselves and puts us in a different space, closer to God. And that certainly was powerfully real for me this week in Arizona. In our letter from James today, we get another glimpse of the other side of things in life when we get more self-focused. He has this wonderful line that I have never noticed before. I've read the Bible so many times, I've preached on the Bible so many times, and yet I can always find something, and I go, I never saw that before. James is talking about how we get very self-focused. He says it's like the person who stares in the mirror. Don't you love that? Staring in the mirror focuses us on ourselves, on our shortcomings as well as our strengths. We can get so self-obsessed that we forget to be in the proper relationship with God and other people. Living life in front of a mirror is sadly the way many of us spend our lives. Obsessed about ourselves, thinking about what we want and what's due us and what we deserve and what we need, and other people drive us crazy because they don't do what we want. That is life in the mirror, right? We spend a lot of our times feeling cranky because other people are not driving correctly, they are not speaking correctly, they're not writing correctly, they're not voting correctly, they're not praying correctly. I spent my childhood terrified that I was doing stuff wrong in church. I've told this story before, but I was kneeling with my Cub Scout buddies on Scout Sunday and got whacked on the head because I was talking during church. I wasn't paying attention. And then I did the unpardonable sin of at coffee hour, instead of going to the kids' punch table, I went and asked for a cup of tea from the grown-up table. Church for me growing up was a place of very clear do's and don'ts, rights and wrongs. It had nothing to do, at least till later, with a transforming relationship with God. That came later and made it really more important to me. So this is what I'm talking about. Life in the mirror is a life where we are constantly resentful of people not doing what we want. But something happens when we turn that mirror into a window. When we begin to look not at ourselves, but at the world and at the people around us and really see them. I could easily have missed. I spend mornings doing the New York Times puzzles. So I've got my nose down in a screen. I could easily have missed the mule deer, the elk, and the hummingbirds if I hadn't bothered to look up and to look out. And I think for me, that is the call of our lessons. Jesus says it's not what goes into you that defiles you, it's what comes out. It's your attitude. It's the way you look at the world. It's the way you interact. The Pharisees were not, I want to say very clearly, the Pharisees were not wrong because they told people to wash their hands and wash their dishes. When you go home, wash your hands and wash your dishes. People, really. That's not the problem. The problem is that the Pharisees were using those very proper laws as a weapon against Jesus. That was the hypocrisy. Not that the law was wrong, but that their view of it was weaponized. They were using it as a lever against Jesus. They were seeing not what Jesus was actually doing. They were looking in a mirror and seeing only themselves and their need to be in control. If only they could have opened that mirror and seen through the window that Jesus was offering them. This happened to me a couple ways this last week. Every Monday, my wife and I play tennis with a group of guys. Afterwards, we go out for Mexican food, and often, we complain about the service, right? Oh, that's very slow, or they're not getting to us fast enough. Well, one day, for some reason, I like to practice my Spanish. So a couple of the waiters are from Mexico, and I was practicing my Spanish, and I got into a conversation with our regular waiter, Juan, and found out something that has totally changed my view of going out for Mexican food. Juan does not live here. He does now. He has a wife and child in Mexico City. He's in Pontiac, in our area, because he's trying to make money to build a house for his wife and son. He works as many hours as he can and as many jobs as he can to try to provide for his family. And he's been separated from them for 3 years. I see Juan a little bit differently because of that conversation. Suddenly, instead of just seeing a person whose whole role in life is to bring me my margarita, he is now a person, right? He's fleshed out. He's got a story. He's got desires of his own. He's got a family. And I'm in a whole different relationship with him because of that. He always perked up because he liked talking Spanish, right? It's hard to talk Spanish with many people. So even my terrible, terrible Spanish was something that he looked forward to, but I now see him in a wholly different way. On the plane coming back from Phoenix, I had the experience which many of you can relate to. You never know who's going to sit with you, right, in your row. And I sat down, and here came a family, and right next to me was the world's most hyperactive 4-year-old who proceeded to poke and kick me for about 4 hours. Not in a bad, like this was a really, really sweet kid. And I was thinking to myself, I was in a different frame of mind, thankfully, because of that beautiful nature that I saw, because of that elk and his bellow, the way he looked at me in that yard, the way God had moved in my heart during that funeral experience. I was not in my usual state of mind, which would have been to be extremely put out and grumpy that I had the bad luck to be seated next to this hyperactive kid. For somehow, through this experience of grieving and having this experience of God, I suddenly asked myself, what is this plane ride like for this kid, right? Not what's it like for me. I know what it's like for me. I've got plenty to occupy myself. But what's it like for this kid? And what's going on for him? And what about his mom? And suddenly the relationship shifted. It wasn't about how dare this kid make my flight miserable. It was, how can this kid have a better experience on this flight? I had some little gummy candies that I brought on the plane, and we shared those, and I showed him my watch, and he played with it. You know, it was okay. But it struck me how different an attitude can be. Just changing from looking in the mirror to looking through the window. Just beginning to see the human being from their perspective instead of just what they can do to or for me. Makes all the difference. I think that's what Jesus was getting at in the gospel. It is from the human heart, it is from the human vision that all these things come, good or bad. No experience is good or bad in and of itself. It is what we bring to it that makes all the difference. What we think is the worst day of our life could be an opportunity for healing or transformation for someone else. What we think is the most difficult experience that we're dreading could become the most positive and life-changing. And all it takes is switching from the mirror to the window. I will think about that rainbow, those elk, those hummingbirds, and boy, hummingbirds are greedy little birds. Susan kept pouring the syrup in, making more and pouring it in there, and they were just, I think they're grieving now that she's come back to Michigan because I don't think there's as much syrup in there for them. But I'm going to think about those images and try my best to keep this idea, this mentality, this gospel message, that in the end, it's really not about us. It's about how God can move in and through us for the healing of the world and for the building up of God's kingdom. Amen.